Thank you and good evening. I'm Reverend Dr. Stephen Rowan, Chairman of the Cleveland Foundation Board of Directors and Senior Pastor of Bethany Baptist Church located in Cleveland's Glenville neighborhood. It's my last year as board chair of the foundation, and while of course I'll still be involved, it's an honor to represent the board and the foundation on this very special night, and we welcome you. The Anisfield-Wolf Book Awards were established in 1935 to honor literature that celebrates diversity and confronts racism. Edith Anisfield-Wolf, a person far ahead of her time, endowed this prize to bring necessary topics and voices to our collective attention. Over the years, the Anisfield-Wolf canon has become a living, breathing community of thinkers, writers, and artists that spans continents, generations, and intellectual traditions. And as the video you just watched demonstrates, Anisfield-Wolf award-winning literature is moving off the pages and into our community in new and exciting ways. The interurban art installations show how these essential works of literature can capture our attention, attention to language, attention to thought, attention to the lives and perspectives of those with whom we share community. Just as we have experienced before, our four winners all speak powerfully from the heart and in turn reach into our hearts as well. We're here to pay attention, to be present, and to give something of ourselves in that effort. Congratulations to each of our winners. Thank you for sharing your work with us and for joining us tonight. Tonight, in keeping with tradition, we will first welcome a young poet to the stage, Eloise Shong-Yu Peckham. She's 10 years old. She is a fifth grader at Campus International School and part of the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. Please join me, Ron Richard, the board of the Cleveland Foundation, and the staff in welcoming her as she reads her poem, A Blessing for Cleveland.
A blessing for Cleveland. May the river be called crooked. May its heavy current cleanse your sorrow. May you walk the streets and hear a steady rhythm ring. May you taste victory washing over you, like it was meant for you. In our city, there are cavaliers. Hear our battle cry, not of war, but of joy. May you feel this world accept you for who you want to become. May your feet sink into the sand on the banks of a lake that's clear. May the people who are silenced rise like dandelions in the sidewalk on the corner of Lorraine.
Excellent, and we thank you. Excellent, excellent. Finally, once again, on behalf of the Cleveland Foundation CEO, Ron Richard, the board, and the staff, we want to welcome some special guests who have joined us tonight. Poet and Akron native A. Van Jordan, who won the 2005 Anisfield-Wolf Book Award for Nonfiction. Let's give him a hand. Okay. Anisfield-Wolf juror and professor of psychology at Harvard University, Dr. Steven Pinker. Let's welcome Dr. Pinker. Anisfield-Wolf juror and poet, our friend Rita Dove. Once again, we welcome Rita Dove. And of course, last but never least, our esteemed chair of Anisfield-Wolf and MC for tonight, Dr. Henry Louis Gates, Jr. Affectionately known to many of us as Skip, Dr. Gates is the founding director of the Hutchins Center for African and American Research at Harvard University, and he again is chair of the Anisfield-Wolf Awards jury. We're blessed to have him as our host this evening, and as I said to him backstage, 27 years to do anything is a long time, and he's done such a great job over the years. We're so thankful to him for his service to Anisfield-Wolf. And so, you know, with these book awards, he's done a fantastic job emceeing year after year, traveling back and forth from the East Coast. So I'd ask you to please, let's give a warm round of applause and a warm welcome to our dear friend, Skip Gates, Dr. Henry Louis Gates.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Give it up for Reverend Rowan, ladies and gentlemen. I asked him if he was going to do a prayer. He said, no, not tonight, because, you know, black preachers and prayers. So I said, you know, Rev, we're on a timetable, but I would have loved to hear him pray. He's really a great preacher. And how about Eloise? Give it up for Eloise, that poem. Future Anisfield-Wolf Book Award winner. So I'm Henry Louis Gates, Jr., and I have the enormous pleasure of serving as the chair of the jury of the Anisfield-Wolf Book Awards, along with my colleagues, Rita Dove, Joyce Carol Oates, Stephen Pinker, and Simon Chama. And as the good Reverend said, Rita and Stephen are with us tonight. So please give it up for the jury, and especially for Rita and for Stephen. I love this presentation ceremony, and I've looked forward to hosting it each year since it was conceived so many years ago by former Cleveland Foundation President Steve Minter and the administrator of the program at that time, Mary Louise Hahn. So please give it up for Steve Minter and Mary Louise Hahn. Now, it's a special pleasure to be in Cleveland this evening, where a week ago at this very hour, the Browns the Cleveland Browns are winning their first game since the Obama administration. I mean, we all miss Barack, but I mean, damn, you know, this is well. Now, I used to be a fabulous fan of the Browns. It's no joke. When Jim Brown was a man, when Jim Brown dominated the gridiron. And I hope that that tradition will be returning to the team soon. So let's give it up for the Browns. Now, I understand that the Budweiser company donated free beer to mark last week's victory. You know, most of y'all don't know this, but I got a free beer once. Back during the Obama administration. It was cold, too. But here's to Cleveland, a city I've come to love because of this prize ceremony. And here's to long overdue victories. Give it up for yourselves. Give it up for Cleveland, please. Now, I want to thank our host, the indefatigable Ron Richard, and the Cleveland Foundation. Give it up for Ron's brilliant, compassionate, committed leadership, and for the good work of one of the truly great city foundations in the United States, which make this award and tonight possible. The guiding force of the evening, the person who makes sure every detail is in place, the person who does so much to bring us all together, is our friend Karen Long. It is she who creates this setting for our celebration of Edith Anisfield-Wolf's vision of literature in the service of life, and for Edith's incredible foresight back in 1935, ladies and gentlemen, when she established this prize, in making a space for reading and understanding diversity's place in our shared civic life. So please join me in giving it up for Karen Long, and please welcome this year's Anisfield-Wolf Book Award winners. Ladies and gentlemen, Karen Long. Thank you, dear. And now to the fun part. The Boston Review has named Shane McCrae one of the hardest working poets in America, a distinction borne out by his extraordinarily large literary output in just a few years. Since his appearance in the Best American Poetry Anthology in 2010, Shane's published 5 collections of poetry, with the 6th, The Gilded Auction Block, set to debut in November of this year. However, McCrae's prodigious output is the culmination of years of writing, beginning with his early 1990s teenage entrancement with the poetry of Sylvia Plath. And since that time, McCrae's devotion to poetry has remained a constant throughout his most unusual career, from a high school dropout to an MFA to a JD from the Harvard Law School, and finally, a prolific poet and Columbia University professor. Isn't that an amazing resume, ladies and gentlemen? With the volume honored here tonight, the author continues the powerful and nuanced examination of race and racism that's marked all of his earlier work. As the New York Times observes, McCrae's language remains as stark as the perdurable, terrible history it contains, a history that is not over yet. For its brilliant meditation on captivity, freedom, and the limitations of language. In the Language of My Captor is this year's recipient of the Anisfield-Wolf Book Award for Poetry. Now, beyond everything else, in the Language of My Captor unfolds the power relationships inherent in different experiences of captivity. Power and submission are exercised and felt linguistically, ideologically, physically, and sexually. In 4 discrete yet interconnected sections, the poet roams over a landscape in which the interior lives of figures, drawn from history, imagination, and the poet's own life, are spoken in words at once broken and achingly articulate. The volume, ladies and gentlemen, is divided into 4 sections, all connected by voices that are meditative and self-reflective. McCrae told the online journal Rumpus that talking about history is a reliable means of achieving a non-confessional approach to identity politics. The first section draws upon the imagined life of Otabenga. Now, Otabenga was a Congolese Mbuti pygmy who was purchased after a pygmy massacre from African slave traders by a South Carolina explorer, anthropologist, and missionary, and then featured as an exhibit in 1906, if you could imagine this, in the Monkey House of the Bronx Zoo. By giving this black exhibit a poetic voice, McCrae overturns the captor's definition of humanity with devastating lines. I say, whether you're here to see me or see the monkeys, you're here to see yourself. Yet the narrator is constrained within his second language by the expectations of his keeper. And he tells us, I must speak and act carefully to maintain his privacy, because the keeper will not trust me to understand even what he has taught me. Ultimately, the captive's most potent resistance is silence, as he refuses to answer the keeper's curiosity about his African home. I cannot talk about the place I came from. I do not want it to exist the way I knew it in the language of my captor. The second section, entitled Purgatory, a Memoir, a Son and a Father of Sons, demonstrates how McCrae pushes the limits of poetry without sacrificing any poetic force. A personal narrative of self-loathing, abuse, and the growth of the spirit, even in a stark and malnourishing environment. This section features stunning prose narrative interrupted by, or is it held together by, poems revealing the life of Jim Limber, the mixed-race orphan, taken on as a ward by none other than Jefferson Davis, referred to here as Daddy Jeff. There are two personae in section 2, both reared by father figures, who show outward signs of both love and hate. Jim Limber is nurtured by a situation, but at the same time imprisoned by it. When the Davis family clothes Jim in the attire of their dead son, Joe, Jim describes the clothing as both loving and constricting. It was Daddy Jeff who kept me fed and wearing those nice clothes until they fit as right as bandages. The orphan Jim needs Davis's love and seeks out ways to understand his subjugation as affection, as when Davis fears capture by the Union Army. He talks to me about things he don't talk, he says, to nobody. That's how I know he loves me, because he don't mind what he shows me. Similarly, the prose memoir, despite its painful physical and sexual violence, presents love as a central need of this more contemporary mixed-race child. The narrator is so bereft of affection that he confesses, "When I was a child, I was willing, even eager, to let anybody do anything they wanted to me." Within this harsh world, the young man wanders through an abandoned village, an apt metaphor for a memoir entitled Purgatory. It's bleak, intermediate space that must be endured before the soul may eventually enter heaven. In the third section of this remarkable collection, McCrae presents an invented historical figure, one reminiscent, frankly, of Stepin Fetchit. This imagined persona, named Banjo Yes, is an early black film star whose career has been based on performing black stereotypes. Banjo's very name has been imposed on him by a white boy who asks, "Is your name Banjo?" I say, "No, sir, my name's Bill." And he says, "Banjo suits you better." Banjo, yes. Despite the boy's age and insignificance in the world of film, the boy's white, and that gives him power over the older black man. This renaming becomes permanent. Banjo exhibits a survivor's pragmatic philosophy when he explains his compliance. This ain't no kind of story where the nigger says no. Banjo's devastating summation of his relationship to power is white folks stay clean because how they own you is they own your options. You can be free or you can live. However, Banjo's compliance comes with a cost, and his rage is expressed in a poem in which he rails at the appropriation of his life. No nigger, he says, tells the story of himself. The link between his life and those of Atabenga, the unnamed memoirist, and Jim Limber is revealed by Banjo's fear of white surveillance. Who's watching me, and what they gonna think they see? His frustration explodes. "I waste my mind trying to read white folks' minds." Keenly aware of his dominated position, Banjo Yes also speaks to the inescapability of language and reading. Ultimately, power and knowledge are articulated and apprehended as weaponized words. The fourth section of the volume speaks in many voices, and they all come together to form the unmistakable voice of contemporary Black America. When, in the penultimate poem, Banjo Yes says, "All of a sudden, I can't breathe." We're reminded of the landscapes of pain and captivity in which we still reside. but out of which we continue to struggle to break free. This is not an easy collection to sit with, but it tells stories, ladies and gentlemen, that need to be told. For his hauntingly beautiful contemplation of American racial history across a century and a half, Shane McCrae is the recipient of the 2018 Anisfield-Wolf Book Award for Poetry.
Them that's got shall have, them that's not shall lose. So the Bible said, and it still is news. Mama made have.
Well, I really can't see any of you. All right. Well, first off, I want to thank Dr. Christine Blasey Ford for testifying today. So, I've been told that folks read excerpts from their work at the beginning, so let me start out with two short poems. The first from In the Language of My Captor, and the second from my forthcoming book, The Gilded Auction Block. Here's the first one. Still, when I picture it, the face of God is a white man's face. Before it disappears, on the sand, his long white beard, before it disappears, the face of the man, in the waves, I ask her, does she see it? Ask her, does. The old man in the waves. As the waves crest, she see it does. She see the old man, his white, his face, crumbling face. It looks as old as he's as old as the ocean looks. And for a moment, almost looks, his face like it's all the way him. As never such old skin looks my daughter age 4. She thinks he might be real. She shouts hello. And after there's no answer, answers no. And here's the second one. Everything I know about blackness, I learned from Donald Trump. And it has an epigraph from Donald Trump, which reads, Frederick Douglass is an example of somebody who's done an amazing job and is being recognized more and more, I notice. America, I was driving when I heard you had died. I swerved into a ditch and wept. In the dream, I dreamed unconscious in the ditch. America, I dreamed you climbed from the ditch. You must believe your body is, and anybody, and stood beside the ditch for 8 years, thinking. Except you didn't stand, you right away lay down on your pale belly and tried to claw your way back to the ditch. You right away began to wail and weep and gnash your teeth. My tears met yours in the ditch, America. They carry me downstream. A slave on the run from you, an Egyptian queen, and even in my dreams, I'm in your dreams. Thank you. From this moment forward, I want to say thank you, a whole lifetime worth of thank yous, to Henry Louis Gates, Jr., not only for his beautiful introduction, which I must somehow learn to both treasure because he spoke it and disbelieve because it can't be true. I thank him not only for his introduction, but also for choosing, along with the other members of the jury, my book for the Anisfield-Wolf Book Award. But I thank equally endlessly Rita Dove and Joyce Carol Oates and Steven Pinker and Simon Schema for the same reason. I can't imagine even one person reading any of my books, let alone 5 people. And not just any 5 people, but 5 people who have, each of them independently of this award, meant a world to me for the worlds they have made and made clearer. Accepting this award, I profit from work that began with them, because I would not be who I am and would not have written in the language of my captor without the work they've done. Nor could I have made, nor could I make, without the support of Melissa McCrae, who married me 9 years ago and whom I love as brightly as one loves at the beginning of love, but more than one can love at the beginning of love. I thank her now and every day. Without my children, Sylvia, Nicholas, and Eden, I could not live to make, and I live to thank them. I thank everyone at the Cleveland Foundation, especially Karen Long, for supporting and facilitating the Anisfield-Wolf Book Awards and for making these few days in Cleveland wonderful. And finally, I thank Karen's husband, Joe, for lending me this tie. After class a few weeks ago, a student of mine, a first-year graduate student, told me they were worried they might not belong in an MFA program. This isn't an especially unusual thing for a first-year student to say, though they don't commonly say it after the very first meeting of their very first graduate-level workshop. I thought the class had gone so well. I asked them why they were worried they might not belong, and it turns out it wasn't because they thought their poems weren't where their poems needed to be. Rather, they said they were worried that their comments on other students' poems would be insufficient, since at this stage in their life as a critical thinker about poetry, they could only say what they didn't like. The student thought they weren't ready for graduate school because they did not yet know how to praise. I've had students who have studied most of their lives to be ready for graduate school, though I can't imagine they would have had that goal in mind when they started out. But I've never had a student as well prepared as this student who did not know how to say why they liked what they liked. Can you imagine it? They thought they wouldn't be a good workshopper because they didn't know how to tell their peers how good their work was. Tonight, N. Scott Momaday and Jesmyn Ward and Kevin Young and myself will hear very kind things about books we've written. Indeed, I've just heard them. But what I heard again and again was really just one word: welcome. I have been allowed a place here and given time to tell you all what you already know and what I hope you already feel. We are, each of us, the lives of each other. We are, each of us, the happiness of each other, even in unhappy times. We are, as my worried student understood, each of us only good for each other when we are at our best. Tonight, with my betters, I have been welcomed, according to the small good I have made, into the community you are even now sustaining between yourselves, and N. Scott Momaday, and Jesmyn Ward, and Kevin Young, and myself. The community you sustain by reading and caring about books. And I find I cannot sufficiently praise you. But even when my writing seems sad, even when my writing seems angry, even when my writing seems despairing, I do not despair, because I write to praise you. Thank you.
John McCrae. That was beautiful, but your most beautiful poem was when you thanked your wife. Wasn't that beautiful? Oh, that was great. Jesmyn Ward, Sing Unburied Sing. As a young girl growing up in a rural area of the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, Jesmyn Ward was haunted by the presence of the Mississippi State Penitentiary, which was also known infamously as Parchman Farm. As she told NPR's Fresh Air, I remember being 7, 8 years old and having nightmares about my uncles and my father being arrested and sent to Parchman Prison. As The Guardian points out in its review of Sing Unburied Sing, the division between carceral and civilian life is porous in this world. Along with incarceration, the family in Ward's novel struggles with entrenched racism, drug addiction, and poverty. Yet the family endures, supported by the land and by their spiritual inheritance. As Ward explained in an interview with Powell's Books, She studied Vodun and Hoodoo in order to incorporate the spiritual world as an important aspect of her character's legacy, allowing them, and I quote, not to transcend their reality, but to access a different understanding of their reality. Succor is also found in the natural world, and Ward's beautifully masterful rendering of southern landscapes has inspired critics to name her as the worthy heir to William Faulkner, Toni Morrison, and Zora Neale Hurston, a remarkable pedigree. As the Washington Post notes, Ward, quote, is one of the most powerfully poetic writers in this country. For this brilliant, lyric, and compassionate novel about a family possessed by the past while fighting for a future, Jesmyn Ward is the recipient of the Anisfield Book Award for fiction. 3 voices narrate Sing Unburied Sing, all with power and urgency. But it's the testimony of Jojo, a 13-year-old biracial child, that is the heart of the novel. The first chapter opens on Jojo's birthday with his assertion that, and I quote, "I like to think I know what death is. I like to think it's something I could look at straight." This opening is both a powerful and simultaneously disconcerting beginning for a coming-of-age story, as he helps Pop, his beloved grandfather, slaughter a goat for his birthday dinner. Jojo takes pride in his ability to watch the killing without flinching. He is as clear-sighted in how he understands his family dynamic. He lives with his black grandparents. Mam is in the painful end stage of cancer. His white father, Michael, is in prison for cooking meth. And his mother, Leonie, is largely absent, often getting high with a fellow waitress. Pop alone provides stability, and it falls to Jojo to care for his sister, the toddler, Kaya, a responsibility that he performs with maternal tenderness. Beyond visual and emotional acuity, Jojo has inherited his grandmother's spiritual gifts. He's able to divine the sounds and movements of animals, and he can see ghosts. Du Bois famously declared that, quote, "The Negro is a sort of seventh son, born with a veil and gifted with second sight in this American world." In this novel, Jojo grows into his psychic inheritance as he confronts quite dangerous situations. Just one among many breathtaking examples. His mother, Leonie, insists on taking her children to pick up Michael from Parchman, despite her intention to make a drug deal on the road. When the family's pulled over by the police, Jojo experiences a terrifying and sadly familiar episode. As he reaches for his grandfather's protection charm in his pocket, Jojo is thrown to the ground by the policeman, handcuffed with a gun to his head, but eventually released. Further menace on the road home comes from Richie, the ghost of a teenager who died at Parchman decades ago, at the same time that Pop, as a young man, had been in prison there. Richie, filled with stories of misery and pain, attaches himself to Jojo as a medium for an audience with Pop, who had been his only friend during the misery and pain of Parchman. Richie's narrative expands the novel's reach into the past. As the Washington Post notes, Richie, quote, "is the agonized spirit of a boy who was in prison when Southern jails were essentially a system of legalized slavery." As Ward has further explained, Parchman was basically a big plantation in the 1930s and the 1940s, and the prisoners were rented out to regional industrial barons to be slaves. Richie recounts with juvenile pride his success in minor thievery to feed his family. But his crime, not surprisingly for anyone who knows anything about the South during this period, is punished with brutality by the authorities rather than viewed with compassion. Richie is sentenced to work the fields at Parchman, where he endures beatings and rape. Caught up in another inmate's escape attempt, Richie is hunted with dogs. Near the end of the novel, Pop finally confesses to Jojo that it was he who sliced Richie's throat to save him from the slow torture of being lynched by a white mob. Like Lady Macbeth, Pop can't erase the horror of this act. Pop tells Jojo, "I wash my hands every day, Jojo, but that damn blood ain't never come out." Ward manages to convey this cascade of horrors bluntly and precisely, and even with what I can read only as a respectful delicacy. Violent death runs as a theme throughout the novel, and the chapters narrated by Leonie reveal the violent death visited upon Given, her brother and Pop's son. When Leonie was in her early teens, Michael's cousin murdered her brother in a fit of jealousy. With the murder officially declared a hunting accident, Given's ghost is denied justice, and his specter visits his sister in her drugged state, in a different type of supernatural moment than those that Jojo experiences. Traumatized by her brother's death, Leonie turns to Michael, finding a drug-like relief and solace in him as the sole white person to apologize to her about Gibbon's death. Leonie describes the beginning of her obsession with Michael, and I quote, "He saw me, saw past skin, the color of unmilked coffee, eyes black, lips the color of plums, and saw the walking wound I was, and came to be my balm." Leonie focuses solely on Michael, even neglecting and sometimes abusing the children they have together to feed her addiction to him. The reader may well find it challenging to muster compassion for such a mother. Yet, as the New York Times asserts, quote, "Such feats of empathy feel genuinely inevitable when offered by a writer of such lyric imagination as Ward. Sing, Unburied Sing allows the dead to speak their pain in many voices, through many bodies and experiences, and conjures an emotional and physical landscape that is, in equal parts, earthly and spiritual." Ladies and gentlemen, for her brilliant unveiling of the forgotten among us, past and present, Jesmyn Ward is the recipient of the 2018 Anisfield-Wolf Book Award for Fiction.
Good, Jimmy, life is moaning down on Parchment Phone. Good, Jimmy, life is moaning down on Parchment Phone. I would hate it so bad, but I left my wife and mom.
Good evening. So I wrote my speech, like I hand wrote it, so you'll have to excuse me because my handwriting is pretty terrible at this point. So if I mess up, I apologize in advance. So when I first committed to writing, I loved literature, but I was not very good at creating it. I was in my early 20s, and I was a beginner, and my work showed it. My characters were flat, my prose tortured, and my sense of plot was non-existent. I didn't know much at all, just that I loved reading, that I loved how words could lift me up out of my life into another experience. I loved how words could slip the boundaries of my life and enable me to become someone else. But I kept trying. Something called me to the page again and again to try again and again to tell stories. After writing my debut novel and meeting with gentle disdain from publishers, I thought of quitting. I thought that perhaps I did not possess the talent and the affinity for writing, and so it would be better for me to return to school, perhaps in the healthcare field, to study a subject that would afford me and my family financial stability. But I could not. Something pulled me to the page. I grew frustrated as I wrestled with that pull. I grew angry that I loved literature so much, but I couldn't write anything of value. I asked myself, why was I cursed with this passion for something if, even with practice, I wasn't good at it? I thought it best for me to set aside this unrequited love, and I tried. But then I visited home and I took my nephew on walks under the stars, and he whispered to me that he wanted me to show him the world. And I listened as my grandmother told me stories about hiding in car trunks to get safely out of white neighborhoods in the 1940s. And then my mother told me about how the windows in her aunt's house exploded during Hurricane Camille in 1969. And I realized that the impetus to create wasn't coming only from me, that it was coming through everyone around me as well, all the people in my family and community who told me stories, and in doing so, taught me how important stories were, how in the telling I grew to understand that stories are memory, stories are history, stories are possibility, and stories are aspiration, that a well-told story can teach you who you are, who you were, and who you might be. It was then that I looked at photos of my dead brother and saw my mother's cheekbones rising like stones from the heart of a river in the curve of his face. And I knew I could not stop trying to write. I knew that I would testify for him, that I would testify for all the boys like him. I looked at my sisters, my mother, my father, my grandmother, my aunts and uncles and cousins and community, and I knew that I would testify for all those like them. After years of hard work and writing, I realized that in testifying for those I knew, my work found its way to those unlike the people I wrote about. I found that in that exchange, readers became characters, and understanding and affinity took root. It is my great honor to receive the Anisfield-Wolf Book Award for Fiction this year, to know that I've told difficult stories, and in your esteem, I've told them well, and in the telling, I've done what all good writers do. I've opened a door to a space where readers and characters meet and find themselves in each other, and at the close of the book, those same readers leave that space feeling more, racked by empathy, by shared experience, seeing the world and those in it anew. So thank you to the Cleveland Foundation, everyone associated with the Anisfield-Wolf Book Awards, especially Henry Louis Gates Jr., Rita Dove, Joyce Carol Oates, Steven Pinker, Simon Shama, Ron Richard, and Karen Long for honoring my efforts so. Finally, I'd like to read to you from the end of Sing Unburied Sing. I'd like for us to find our way to that space and onward, home together. So the moment I'm going to read about is a scene where Jojo meets Richie, the ghost, because Jojo is out for a walk on his own. There's so many, Richie says. His voice is molasses slow. So many of us, he says, hitting the wrong keys, wandering against the song. He sounds tired. He lies down, looks up at me from his bed. His head is bent wrong from the root beneath it, which butts up against his neck, a hard pillow. Stuck. You seen the snake? Did you know? Richie says. I shake my head. Me, he drags, neither. So many crying loose and lost, he says. His blinks, a cat on the ledge of a nap. Now you understand, he says. He closes his eyes, lets go a bullfrog's croak. Now you understand life. Now you know death. He is quiet asleep, but he moves, one long brown line rippling like water. And then I see it. He ascends the tree like the white snake. He undulates along the trunk to the branches where he rolls out along one again in a recline. and the branches are full. They are full with ghosts, 2 or 3, all the way up to the top, to the feathered leaves. There are women and men and boys and girls. Some of them near their babies. They crouch, looking at me, black and brown, and the closest near baby, smoke white. None of them reveal their deaths, but I see it in their eyes, their great black eyes. They perch like birds, but look as people. They speak with their eyes. He raped me and suffocated me until I died. I put my hands up and he shot me 8 times. She locked me in the shed and starved me to death while I listened to my babies playing with her in the yard. They came in my cell in the middle of the night and they hung me. They found I could read and they dragged me out to the barn and gouged my eyes before they beat me. Still I was sick and he said I was an abomination. And Jesus said, suffer little children, so let her go. And he put me under the water and I couldn't breathe. Eyes blink as the sun blazes and winks below the forest line so that the ghosts catch the color, reflect the red, the sun making scarlet plumage of the clothes they wear, rags and breeches, t-shirts and tignons, fedoras and hoodies. Their eyes close and then open as one, looking down on me and then up at the sky as the wind circles them and moans, their mouths gaping now, the airy rush their song, the rush, yes. I stand until there is no sun. I stand until I smell pine through the salt and sulfur. I stand until the moon rises and their mouths close and they are a murder of silver crows. I stand until the forest is a black-knuckled multitude. I stand until I bend, find a hollow stick, turn to the house and whip the air in front of me, away from the dead, to find Pop holding Kayla. They shine bright as the ghosts in the dark. We was worried about you, Pop says. Yes, they hiss. You didn't come back, he says. I shrug even though he can't see it. Kayla squirms. Down, she says. No, Pop says. Down, Pop, please, she says. Let's go, I say. Knowing that tree of ghosts is there makes the skin on my back burn, like hundreds of ants are crawling up my spine, seeking tenderness between the bones to bite. I know the boy is there, watching, waving like grass and water. Please, Kayla says, and Pop lets her slide down. No, Kayla, I say. Yes, she says, and then she toddles past me, unsteady on the dark ground. She faces the tree, nose up to the air, head tilted back to see. Her eyes Michael's, her nose Leonie's, the set of her shoulders Pop's, and the way she looks upward like she is measuring the tree, all ma'am. But something about the way she stands, the way she takes all the pieces of everybody and holds them together is all her, Kayla. Go home, she says. The ghosts shudder, but they do not leave. They sway with open mouths again. Kayla raises one arm in the air, palm up, like she's trying to soothe Casper, but the ghosts don't still, don't rise, don't ascend and disappear. They stay. So Kayla begins to sing, a song of mismatched, half-gobbled words, nothing that I can understand. Only the melody, which is low but as loud as the swish and sway of the trees, that cuts their whispering but twines with it at the same time. And the ghosts open their mouths wider and their faces fold at the edges, so they look like they're crying, but they can't. And Kayla sings louder. She waves her hand in the air she sings, and I know it, know the movement, know it's how Leonie rubbed my back, rubbed Kayla's back when we were frightened of the world. Kayla sings, and the multitude of ghosts lean forward, nodding. They smile with something like relief, something like remembrance, something like ease. Yes. Kayla tugs my arm, and I lift her up. Pop turns. I follow him as he looks for raccoon and possum and coyote, bends branch after branch as he leads us back to the house. Kayla hums over my shoulder, says, shh, like I am the baby and she is the big brother, says shh, like she remembers the sound of the water in Leonie's womb, the sound of all water, and now she sings it. Home, they say. Home. Thank you.
Jasmine Ward. Kevin Young. Bunk. The rise of hoaxes, humbugs, plagiarists, phonies, post-facts, and fake news. Anyone who's familiar with the concise musical and tightly constructed poetry of Kevin Young's 11 volumes of verse might well be startled by the sprawling, expansive title of the book that we celebrate here tonight. But its name alone, Bunk. By its name alone, Bunk, this new volume gleefully announces its encyclopedic tour, ranging over 447 pages, delving into the world of the fake. When Young writes in a captivating voice, and many of the hoaxes he discloses are quite entertaining, but he never lets the reader ignore the danger of lies. As The Atlantic points out, Young's rich history could not in fact be more urgent in a time in which fact and empiricism are threatened by choose-your-own-reality impulses, unquote. In addition to examining the confusion of living in the era of truthiness, Bunk, more importantly, exposes the ugly truth that racial anxiety is at the heart of most American hoaxes. Young's scholarly approach, in combination with his lively voice, makes this book, in the words of the New York Times, an enthralling, essential history of the hoax. For his groundbreaking volume, Kevin Young is the 2018 recipient of the Anisfield-Wolf Book Award for Nonfiction. In his examination of the connection between race and hoaxes, Young begins by discussing the notorious showman P.T. Barnum's exploitation of Joyce Heth, an elderly black woman whom he presented as the nursemaid of George Washington. Declaring that Heth was 161 years old, Barnum, who probably purchased her, made a fortune from this wildly popular hoax. Even after her death, Heth's body was a matter of public exhibit when she was given to a coroner for examination. As Young explains, America's continued fascination with the body of the other stems from the efforts to establish racial superiority. Other shams, including the Fiji mermaid, the moon hoax, and the Cannibal King, made the 19th century the age of imposture, an era that perfected that mix of shame and superiority, he writes, that constitutes the humbug. Barnum's insistence on exoticism conflated evolution and exploration, safely confining the faux foreign curiosities in American cages. As Young explains, these many exhibits of human beings held in captivity provided what he calls an allegory for slavery, as well as a support for the burgeoning field of race science. As the Washington Post points out, Bunk contains, quote, a trove of fresh and persuasive insights, and these are particularly valuable to the literary critic as Young moves into the late 20th and early 21st century artistic impostures. Recent years have produced an overabundance of fake memoirs, and this volume exposes the racial anxiety at the center of these narratives. Among the many autobiographies written by white people pretending not to be white are A Gay Girl in Damascus, authored in 2011 by a white man from Georgia, and a 3-part memoir published between the year 2000 and 2004 by a white man posing as a Native American. Adding plagiarism to hokum, Timothy Patrick Barris, the real author and fake Native American, based his stories on the writings of the actual Native American Sherman Alexie. Other examples abound, but Young rejects emphatically the argument that all autobiography is, to some degree, fictional, and insists that such imaginative, cross-cultural creations should be labeled fiction. In the literature of ethnic usurpation, the writer necessarily relies on stereotypes, thus distancing the reader from reality. As Young asserts, and I quote, "In defending the truth against the hoax, we are in fact defending the imaginary, preserving the possibility that make-believe can make claims on our emotions, but not our facts," unquote. As Young was nearing completion of this book, having sent a draft to his publisher, the Rachel Dolezal story broke out. In exasperation, Young describes his dismay when, as he puts it, Dolezal raised up her faux nappy head. And he realized when he saw it that he had to take time to write about her too, as he says. In his deeply personal meditation on this story, Young links the long tradition of blackface to Dolezal, explaining those who wear blackface reduce blackness to skin in order to be white. Young's anger at Dolezal is not so much at her attempts to look black as, he writes, those surprised by a white lady darkening her skin and curling her hair haven't been out of the house in a while. Rather, it's her claim that she felt black that is so very troubling to Young. He reflects being black is not a feeling. I don't always feel colored. Nor is it simply a state of mind. His linking of the absurdity of Dolezal's cultural appropriation to the tragedy of the Mother Emanuel massacre starkly illustrates the difference between pretending to be black and being black. Young cuts through the inanity of the Dolezal hoax to expose the reality of the black experience, including his own experiences of anti-black racism. While Young's engagement with the present administration is limited in Bunk, he does address the Trump presidency in the final chapter entitled The Age of Euphemism. Truthiness replaces truth and facts with factoids in an age in which Donald Trump replaces P.T. Barnum as the greatest showman. As Young sees it, quote, our age of euphemism differs from Barnum's age of imposture in that while imposture merely masks, euphemism misunderstands and misspeaks, going so far as to spite its own face. For Young, President Trump's ascendancy, quote, signals a more troubling mindset, one in which the truth isn't so much absent or contested as it doesn't matter. Belief, we might say, trumps reality. Young's attempt at providing some hope for the future is his speculation that truth, and I quote, is not an absolute or relative, but a skill, a muscle like memory that has weakened from our neglect. If so, the concept of truth could be strengthened if we're willing, collectively, to make the effort. Ladies and gentlemen, for his timely, brilliant, and thought-provoking study of the lies we are told and the lies we tell ourselves, Kevin Young is the recipient of this year's Anisfield-Wolf Book Award for Nonfiction.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Skip. And Karen, thanks so much to the Anisfield-Wolf Awards and the Cleveland Foundation. Thank you to the judges for this really important honor for me. And thank you to my fellow winners tonight. I'm really honored to be alongside Shane and Jasmine and Scott Momaday. It's really an honor. They're some of my favorite writers. I first heard of the Anisfield-Wolf Awards from Langston Hughes. Not personally, mind you, but he won in nonfiction he won in fiction in 1954. And I was thinking a lot about my connections to Hughes. I do often. He, of course, was a poet writing in a different genre, winning. And winning in that way for me tonight has meant a lot. He, of course, too, spent time here in Cleveland. And as a young child in Topeka, Kansas, where I went to high school. So I like to think that his spirit connects us. His ashes now actually repose in the Schomburg Center, where I'm the director in Harlem. And so for me, this is really a full circle night. And I think it's fitting that the award itself is a circle. I really want to thank many people who helped this book come about, and took 6 years to write. I thought, no one will want to care about fakery. Suddenly, it was relevant. I really want to thank Kate, who made this all possible. I also want to thank Richard Nash, my good friend who's here, and who the book is dedicated to. He had to suffer the indignity of being identified only by initials because he knew some of the fakers in the book. But we fixed that, so. I'm just going to read a couple portions of the book, something from the beginning and something from the end. This is the start of the whole book, from the Age of Imposture. Quote, "What the American public always wants is a tragedy with a happy ending. If William Dean Howells was instinctively right when he told this to his fellow novelist Edith Wharton, then the hook of the modern hoax has been to separate the tragedy from that American happy ending. Recently, the hoax, at least after the 19th century, that Wharton and Howells had just seen turn, pretends every tragedy is far worse than it really is, if only to make the scripted ending, no matter how apocalyptic it may be, all the happier. Once the hoax meant to honor, now it embraces horror. Once it sought to praise, today the hoax mostly traffics in pain." Skipping ahead. This raises a central question. Is there something especially American about the hoax? Where the 18th century was the hoax's height in Britain, the 19th century starred the United States, so much so that someone at the time called it the Age of Imposture. Hoaxing would ironically prove one key way 19th century America sought to establish its bona fides after the fact. Just as a century before, Shakespearean fakes and finds were attempts to claim ancestry and British culture's supremacy. The age of reason gave way to romanticism, which prized truth, originality, mystery, and beauty, while also including a bevy of fakers who capitalized on those very things. In contrast, born in the 18th century as an adult, writes critic Curtis McDougall, the United States during the 19th century felt the lack of a childhood with its rich memories and cherished traditions. This lack led to a host of hoaxes. There's indeed a powerful, persistent notion that the American character is filled not just with tall tales and sideshows, but also with con men and fake Indians, pretend blacks and imposter prophets with masks and money. So P.T. Barnum is who sort of starts the book off, as Professor Gates mentioned, and he very much was someone who was invested in this notion of Americanness just by showing Joyce Heth, who he claimed, as was mentioned, was 161 years old. He was connecting us to this glorious history. Then when he died, we think that he bought her and probably owned her as a slave. We think he also removed her teeth to make her look older. He took her back to New York. She was on the road, and had her dissected, essentially, autopsied in a medical theater and charged admission. And this idea that alive or dead, he owned her, sort of floats throughout the hoax. And I started off thinking, why do we deceive each other? And I came to write about why we believe. Why do we believe these things? And in many cases, why do we believe, especially now, the worst about each other, our fears? And I thought I'd end with talking about Rachel Dolezal. I was worried Skip was going to scoop my whole speech. But as he mentioned, she pretended to be black, dyed her hair, dyed her skin, and changed her hair, and was the head of an NAACP chapter. So this is from a chapter called Blacker Than Thou, and I'll just skip around. It was never easy for me. I was born a poor black child. The beginnings of Steve Martin's The Jerk still makes me laugh, with its twist on Once Upon a Time. The dissonance between what we know of the white comedian Martin, his relative success, and his obviously false declaration sends up not only the tragic showbiz biography, but the corny black one. In both, the worser, the better. It also suggests his character's transformation, his overcoming. After all, he's clearly white now, not to mention his current lot in which he's smudged, bummy, apparently destitute. His isn't blackface, but his face half greased is certainly part of the effect. It's a familiar one, in other words, to black people used to watching white people only claim blackness as a poor me stance. Now, why does this jerk remind me of Rachel Dolezal? I thought I'd nearly finished this book, filled with hoaxers and imposters, plagiarists and phonies, but as soon as I had sent a draft to my publisher, elated and relieved, Rachel Dolezal raised up her faux nappy head. Now I have to take time to write about her too. I can't decide if Dolezal, the woman revealed to have been merely pretending to be black, lecturing as such and leading her local NAACP, is a natural extension of what I've been saying all along, or distraction from the book's larger point, that quite regularly, faced with the paradox of race, the hoax rears its head. It turns out, I now know, it rears its rear too. When Rachel Dolezal's fraud first broke and was simply a joke on Black Twitter, I identified some of my favorite Twitter titles for the inevitable anticipated memoir. Their eyes were watching Oprah. That one's mine. Imitation of Life, from Victor Laval. Blackish like me, mine too. Now things done got serious. One of the best things about being black is that, barring some key exceptions, it's not a volunteer position. You can't just wish on a dark star and become black. It's not paid either. It's more like a long internship with a chance of advancement. Did Dolezal really fool those black folks around her? I have a strange feeling she didn't, that many simply humored her. You have to do this with white people from time to time. I can hear Richard laughing. It's throwing up. Teaching a class about blackness doesn't mean you are black. Blackness ain't a bunch of facts to memorize or set of stock behaviors, nor darker skin color neither. It's like the jazz heads I've seen, often white, who can tell you every sideman on the session but seem in the daylight unable to find the beat. The beat is always there, doesn't mean you can always hear it. While black folks can often hear the beat and set it, doesn't mean when anyone else hears it that she gets to be black. So when the killer, name withheld, walked into Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston 1 week after the Dolezal story broke, I'm not surprised that black worshipers there welcomed him. Welcome is an integral part of the African American Christian tradition. It is especially so in the African Methodist Episcopal one, begun over 200 years ago when the Methodist Church prevented blacks, mostly freedmen and women, from praying beside its whites, even pulling them off their knees during prayer. How long did Name Redacted sit there waiting in a prayer circle, deciding to deny the evidence of humanity before him? Nothing, it appears, could have convinced him not to kill blacks who he believed and spewed hate about, preyed on white people, especially women. One suspects he may not have known any women beside his family. Being black is not a feeling. I don't always feel colored, nor is it simply a state of mind. Blackness, a way of being. After the killings in Charleston, several things happened. Dolezal's story went back to being merely ridiculous. Talk shows moved on to something else, and those who somehow willed Dolezal sublime retreated. Flags flew at half-staff, except the Confederate flag on South Carolina's State House grounds. It took a black woman, Brittany Newsom, to climb up and take that down. They gave the assignment to a black man to raise the rebel flag back up. Like Sally Hemings, he might not have minded, but he certainly couldn't have refused. Sinking feeling. Black-faced person always occupies a bigger public stage than a black one. I came out black as a teenager. Before then, I was simply a boy. After I was, sometimes, still. Of course, you can see why anyone would want to be black. Being black is fun. Don't tell nobody. This morning, I woke from a deep Negro sleep, as Leopold Senghor put it. I then took a black shower and shaved a black shave. I walked a black walk and sat a black sit. I wrote some black lines. I coughed black and sneezed black and ate black too. This last, at least, is literal. Grapes, blackberries, the ripest plums. Thank you.
Kevin Young. Thank you, Kevin. N. Scott Momaday. When asked if he agreed that the novel, Housemaid of Dawn, led to the breakthrough of Native American literature in American letters, N. Scott Momaday modestly replied, "You can argue that." I don't think that there can be any argument about the fact that the author that we honor here tonight is the dean of the Native American literary renaissance. Momaday is the author of 16 books of poems, autobiography, essays, fiction, plays, and folklore. His groundbreaking Pulitzer Prize for Housemaid of Dawn in 1968 marked the reemergence of Native American voices and narratives in fiction. In addition, Momaday is a talented watercolorist, a founder of the Buffalo Trust to preserve Native American culture, an esteemed professor, and the member of the Kiowa Gourd Dance Society. In all facets of his life, Momaday celebrates the sacred in nature and the strength and beauty of traditional life. For his invaluable contributions, he is this year's Anisfield-Wolf Book Award Lifetime Achievement recipient. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for N. Scott Momaday. Momaday grew up surrounded by storytellers, and he credits among the chief influences on his writing the Native American oral tradition, especially the Kiowa legends imparted to him by his father. His mother was a writer, and he was surrounded by a wide range of literature as a child, influencing his desire to follow in her footsteps. His father was a painter, and both parents taught in Indian schools. Momaday's parents provided a rich heritage of artistic production, and this, in conjunction with the cultures that he experienced growing up on Navajo, Apache, and Pueblo reservations, shaped Momaday's writings. In Housemaid of Dawn, he describes a traditional world that persists despite successive efforts to destroy its foundations, and I quote, "Their invaders were a long time in conquering them, and now, after 4 centuries of Christianity, they still pray in Tanouan to the old deities of earth and sky. They have assumed the names and gestures of their enemies, but have held on to their own secret souls. And in this, there is resistance and an overcoming, a long outwaiting." In an interview with the Santa Fe Reporter, Mama Day describes the essence of all tribal life as, quote, "having blood that existed on this continent for 30,000 years. Within this span of time, American literature arose in Mama Day's assertion to the New York Times, quote, "not with the Puritans in New England, but with an anonymous man or woman incising an image on a canyon wall in Utah 2,000 years ago." Within the historical scope of American literature, Mama Day is insistent that he is first and foremost a poet. He declares, quote, "poetry is the queen of literature. I'd rather be a poet," he says, "than anything else." Among his influences, he cites Emily Dickinson as the greatest American poet, naming Wallace Stevens as probably second. Concerning his own creative process, Mama Day has said, "You have to put all of yourself into writing. Therefore, you can only do it for a certain period of time. 4 hours or so is about as much as I can put into writing in a given day." As he draws the rhythm and repetition of the oral tradition to create verse structure, Mama Day's great topic is the spirit and the grandeur of the American West. About the landscape of the West, he has said, quote, "there is this part of the country, a very large part of it, which really has to be seen to be believed. But best of all," he concludes, "it has to be imagined." Reflecting on his own imagination, he writes in the poem Notebook, "As a child, I remarked the world in scrawls of wonder, and so do I now in the envy of age." A further explication of a poet's creative urge is found in his stunning poem, Winter Arcs. A poet stands among smoking stones and cold waterfalls and thinks of nothing. And yet, the faint impulse to tell of creation comes upon him. The story is too large for a couplet or even a quatrain. Dumb with wonder, he beholds rainbows and the random fishes that rise and freeze, iridescent on the air. In these lines, we see the struggle of the inspired poet to use language to forge his own creation. Overwhelmed by a beauty that eludes speech, the writer's passion is tempered but not overcome. For ushering us into a world of spirit and imagination, in which tradition, while under assault, endures. For infusing language with the sacred, and for sharing his Native American heritage with all readers. N. Scott Mama Day is this year's recipient of the Anisfield-Wolf Book Award Lifetime Achievement. Give it up for Scott Mama Day. got Mama Day.
Did you put this on the table for me? Yeah. Oh, I got it. Yeah? No, I'll get it. Thank you. Thank you so much. You know, from there to here is a longer and more arduous journey than you might think. I want to congratulate the other recipients of this prestigious award. I want to thank Skip and Karen and the members of the Cleveland Foundation and the officers of the Anisfield-Wolf Award. I am a poet. Among other things, I've written in various forms, as Skip mentioned. I'm a storyteller as well, and tonight I want to tell you a story or two and perhaps recite a poem. In 2008, I was on a train going from Moscow to Vladivostok across the breadth of Siberia, across 9 time zones. And one night, I was awakened by the stopping of the train. And I looked out my compartment window and I saw that we had come to a small station. There were yellow lights in the mist, and I could see figures moving about, moving into doorways, in and out of doorways. We had entered Mongolia. And then a young man came to my compartment, a soldier. He was straight and tall and good-looking, had very black, shining eyes. He was very polite, and I gave him the papers of entry that I had filled out in advance. And as I was looking at him, I had a strange feeling. And I thought, I know this man, and I have been here before. 30,000 years ago, I had returned to a place of origin. You know, I went to Stanford as a graduate student on a creative writing fellowship in poetry. I didn't know much about poetry when I went there. I thought I did. But I didn't really know the difference between an iamb and a spondee. And I learned a lot at Stanford. And I wrote a poem in my first year there, which was my first really successful poem. It was awarded the American Academy of Poetry Award. It's called The Bear. And I am a bear. I am named for a place in Wyoming which is a sacred place to the Kiowa people, my people. And it tells the story of 7 sisters who were born into the sky, and they became the stars of the Big Dipper. And they were chased by a bear, a boy who turned into a bear, and I am the reincarnation of that boy. I, too, turn into a bear on occasion. And I don't mean to frighten you. If that should happen tonight, bear with me. I apologize for that. Anyway, here is the bear. What ruse of vision escarping the wall of leaves, rending incision into countless surfaces, would cull and color his somnolence, whose old age has outworn valor, all but the fact of courage. Seen, he does not come, move, but seems forever there, dimensionless, dark in the windless noon's hot glare. More scarred than others these years since the trap maimed him, pain slants his withers, drawing up the crooked limb. Then he is gone, whole, without urgency from sight, as buzzards control imperceptibly their flight. That's a syllabic poem. It's a poem that the meter of which is determined purely by the number of syllables to the line, in this case 5, 7, 5, 7. And that was an experimental kind of poetry for me when I went to Stanford. I'd been preceded there by a poet I admired very much, a British poet whose name was Tom Gunn. And Tom Gunn began to experiment with syllabic poetry, and I followed in his footsteps, and I took up the experiment and have had some success with it and a great deal of gratification. I also write lesser poems. I once moved to Tucson, Arizona, and I'd never before been in the desert, the real desert. There I was on the fringe of the Sonoran Desert. And I found out that when people go to Tucson to live, they buy a house with 2 kinds of air conditioning and a swimming pool. And so I did that too, and I started swimming as a kind of exercise. And I discovered that swimming laps is one of the most boring professions. It's more boring than jogging, because at least with jogging the scene changes. But as you're swimming and you're looking down at the bottom of the pool, going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, it's maddening. And I started to overcome, or try to overcome this boredom by composing epitaphs as I swam. And I've collected a number of these, and I'll share a couple with you, but I want you to realize that these were composed without benefit of pencil and paper, and while I was completely wet. Here is one called, this is a 2-lapper. And it's called On Chastity. Here lies a lady, sweet and chaste. Here lies the matter, chaste makes waste. I was invited to attend a conference of ceramicists in Phoenix one day, and I went there, and I didn't know what to expect. They were coming from all over the world, these potters, and they wore little pottery name tags, which I thought was rather kitschy, but you know. And when I got back to my home in Tucson, I jumped in the pool, and I composed this 4-lapper. Here lies the potter Tim O'Day, who has himself become his clay. And lest his memory be forgot, recycle him into a pot. I'll tell you one more story. I wrote a book called The Way to Rainy Mountain, and it is a collection of Kiowa folk tales to which I've added commentary. And one of the tales is about a talking dog. And in the Kiowa oral tradition, one of the ways in which you indicate something far back in time is to say, this happened long ago when dogs could talk. It's a wonderful idea, isn't it? Well, the story has it that a man was thrown away. We're not quite sure what that meant, but it couldn't be good. And he found himself alone on the prairie, and he had a bow and some arrows, and he expended his arrows hunting food, and finally he ran out of arrows, and he was pretty much at the mercy of the elements. Whereupon a dog comes up to him and says, "Oh, I wouldn't want to be in your moccasins. There is danger all around. You're completely surrounded by enemies." And the man said, "Well, tell me something I don't know." And the dog said, "You know, I could save you." And the man says, "Well, for heaven's sake, if you can save me, please do." And the dog said, "Well, the dog says, wait a minute. You know how dogs are. Wait a minute. I have puppies. They are small. They are cold. They are hungry. If you will take care of my puppies, I will save you." And of course the man agreed. The bargain was struck, and the story ends, the dog led the man round and round, and they came to safety. Well, one day, I was living in San Francisco, and I was invited to speak to a group of 6th graders at the Hebrew Academy of San Francisco. And I accepted. But I had second thoughts. I wasn't used to speaking to children of that age group, and so I wasn't sure what I would tell them. And I thought of that story. I thought, what 6th grader can resist the story of a man who was saved by a talking dog? And so I launched into the story, and I said, "This happened a long time ago when dogs could talk. The little girl in the front row looked at me and she said, 'Those were the days.'" So I want to greet you warmly, to thank you wholeheartedly, and very sincerely to wish you well. Thank you. All right, sir.
My heavens. Good evening. I'm Karen Long, and Edith has one final announcement for you tonight. The new winner of the Anisfield-Wolf Memorial Prize, a yearly gift for a nonprofit doing exceptional work. This year, it goes to the May Dugan Center. A settlement house-style institution on the near west side that connects residents with food, clothing, jobs, many services. May Dugan herself took in destitute people right onto her Cleveland front porch. She was a contemporary of Edith Anisfield-Wolf, and I like to think their paths may have crossed. And now, thank you, Skip. Thank you, Ron. And thank you, Edith. You built the scaffolding we've enjoyed tonight. Please come up, Shane McRae, who makes captivity speak so we can hear every syllable. And join him, please, Jesmyn Ward, who conjures our beloved dead and brings the past into the present. And Kevin Young, who shows us the truth of our lies. Please join them and Scott Momaday, a storyteller who can render public spaces sacred with meaning. George Rita Dove and Steve Pinker, your beautiful minds led us to these books. Come up. Come up. You are all Anisfield-Wolfians now. I'm grateful to our partners, venerable and brand new, and growing. The list is growing. IdeaStream is hosting video from tonight and interviews with each of our authors on its website. For year-round updates and news, please visit Anisfield-Wolf.org. Remember, you can tune into Professor Momaday's City Club talk at 12:30 tomorrow, and you can join Kevin Young at Worthington Yards Friday for Bunk and a Beer. Cleveland Book Week stretches into Saturday with the Great Lakes Black Authors Expo at the East Cleveland Public Library, and Saturday afternoon at 2 with the author and the illustrator of the marvelous picture book Crown in the Stokes wing of the Cleveland Public Library, our first family event. Now, dear audience, please join the winners on stage where they will be signing their books alongside Skip Gates, Stephen Pinker, and Rita Dove. To make your passage easier this year, refreshments await you around the corner in the Ohio Theater lobby. Now is your moment to enter the conversation. Thank you for joining us tonight.